the real VA, not the DMV part. You know,
Wow. Wow.
yo, the
Praise
DMV
God.
is different. So we're going high level today. All right, welcome to Get On Code, the Fly Guy Show, which is a series of melanated conversations focused on empowerment, health, wealth, and knowledge of self.
People think in binary choices because they are conditioned to.
And on the wall was a picture of a wolf and a lion. I think the wolf was the Democratic Party, the lion was the Republicans.
But the drug trade and all these illegal stuff that people do, that's still economics. It's just that they couldn't do it in a traditional system.
We're talking about melanated wealth.
So we can build wealth, but we just, for some reason, don't seem to be able to transfer it.
You had a great experience. Fine. That means nothing.
What were you told as a child about education? You had to be how many times better?
Every impression without an expression becomes depression.
Code Keepers. We have Diamond Drip on the platform. Yes, again, she blew it up the last few times, so had to let you know about this. If you learn, if you earn, you need to make sure you protect your assets. But right now, we're going to talk about gene keys and human design. Oh my gosh. So if you were around for our human design conversation earlier, your mind is still blowing, you're still processing, you're learning and earning. Let's talk about the gene keys. I want to talk about epigenetics. I want to talk about generational trauma. Is there really a thing as generational curses? Where they do that at? Tell us all about gene keys and human design.
Yes, I love this. So, as discussed, human design is a synthesis of a bunch of different sciences. And so Gene Keys actually takes a closer look at two of those sciences specifically. So quantum physics and the Chinese I Ching. And so in Gene Keys, there are in human design, there are 64 gates. In Gene Keys, there are 64 keys. And they're very much, it's from the I Ching. And so what Gene Keys looks at is the different frequencies in which these things show up in our life. So every single gene key has a shadow frequency, which if we're not awake, if we're not aware, then this is where we spend a lot of our time. Then you have the gift. So in working through the shadow, you transform it into the gift frequency. And then at the highest level is the city. So this is when things are clicking on all cylinders, everything's in alignment. You're walking or being pulled, I should say, towards your purpose. This is how this gift shows up in your life. And so in Gene Keys, there are 3 different sequences. So you have your activation sequence, which talks about what you're here to do in this lifetime, what you're here to learn, what deeply fulfills you, and what your purpose is. Then you have your Venus sequence, which looks at karma and dharma and your genetic wounds. We all have genetic wounds. We all have sexual wounds. And those the genetic wounds at least have been passed down through generations. And so it's so fascinating when we as spiritual leaders have been talking about something for so long, and then like modern science, so you mentioned epigenetics, kind of catches up to that, and it's validating what we were just, talking about in theory at one point. And so when it comes to genetic wounds, it's very closely related. Then there's the prosperity sequence, which is all about, how do you maximize your gifts? How do you maximize your relationships in this lifetime in order to welcome in prosperity and success in that way that you are contributing to the community, to the collective? That's kind of what Gene Keys is in a nutshell.
All right. Well, we're always concerned on how this new information, this new insight can empower us. So now that we have an understanding of what gene keys are, how does this information make our lives better?
Absolutely. So Gene Keys, one of the core principles is contemplation. And so we live in a society and a culture that is go, 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 answers now, do this now, buy this now. And the idea of slowing down for a second to think about or reflect on the past and how that has impacted us right now and how it will impact our future, like that's not something that we oftentimes get to make time for. And so when you're able to look at your gene keys, look at the different sequences, you're able to see areas in your life where you've leaned into the shadows and you're able to make the empowered choice to do something differently. And so I'll give the example of me in my activation sequence, in my what I'm here to do piece. I have gene key 53, which in human design is the gate of beginnings. And so in gene keys, the shadow frequency is immaturity. And so through listening to the contemplation of the shadow, it's moving from this place of external fixation, which we are conditioned to be in a place of external fixation because we grew up in the post-industrial era, right? We go to school so we can get a good job, so we can, do the things that we want to do until retirement, and then we live our life. That's the current path. But in going to school, we are seeking that external validation. We're seeking that A grade. We're seeking, above C because we don't want to be average. And so what happens is we get so fixated on that external validation that when we get to a certain point where we've graduated out of that system, we're still looking for it. And so the shadow of immaturity is moving from a place of external fixation into a place of internal groundedness. My coach, who is leading the anthology that I'm a part of, she really challenged me on this because, I did the work. We had been writing the chapters for months, and I finally felt like I had something that was worth like being put in a book. Like I love the cover. I was like, the cover is great, but I need to make sure my chapter is good. And so when I finally, got it and I, read it to her, I did like a read through of my chapter. She was like, and I was, waiting for her to be like, wow, that was amazing. That was great. This was awesome. And she didn't do that. Not initially. She was like, how do you feel about it? And I was like, I think I feel good about it. I did all the things that you asked me to. There's a hook. Like I started with a thing at the beginning and I made it tie in at the end and I talked about emotion. So I think it's good. And she's like, you should. And then she made me validate myself and say it not as a question mark. And then she was able to be like, no, and you should feel that way because that was awesome. This is a great chapter. I didn't like her for a moment there because she made me validate myself, but that's what I'm supposed to do. And so when we transform this shadow of immaturity, you have the gift, which is expansion. So many times we hold ourselves back because we're waiting for someone to tell us that what we're about to do is okay. That, we've got the gold star, we've got the stamp of approval. And if we're not able to give that to ourselves, then we're constantly going to be waiting for that someone else to tell us these things. And when you're able to transform the shadow into the gift of expansion, the city is superabundance. And I remember when I know.
All right. I just want to let all the code keepers process what you just said. I think it's important that one of the things that you said that I wrote it down was looking for acceptance. So you kind of described that very often we look for acceptance from outside before we can accept ourselves. We're looking for outside validation before we can self-validate. Wow. And then you started talking about the city.
Yeah.
So what is this city? You know, I'm from Brooklyn, New York. I'm from Columbus, Ohio. I live in Virginia Beach, Virginia. 2 up, 2 down for VA. Well, the real VA, not the DMV part. You know.
Wow.
You know, the DMV is different. The DMV is different. As a matter of fact, my family lives in the DMV, and they shared with me that we're the DMV. You're Virginia. Is it different? If you can't get on the metro and get to it, you ain't in the DMV. So stop calling yourselves DMV. But back to the city. What is the city? I want to make sure I have a framework for understanding what you're talking about.
So the city is a Sanskrit word. So it's not, I know it sounds like city, but it's SIDDHI. And so right, a lot of things in quantum physics, it's hard to describe with our 3D words. But like I said, it's when you're being pulled towards your purpose, what you're here to do in this lifetime. And so for mine, it just so happens to be superabundance. And I remember when I read that, and I was not feeling super abundant at the time. And so I was, however, feeling like the part about the immaturity was ringing true. I was like, I am seeking a lot of external validation. And I was like, how do I shift into this super abundance that's apparently like a thing for me? And that's where the shadow work comes in, because so many times we will drink to numb whatever it is. Like, we're like, I don't want to face that. I'm just going to go to the bar. I'm just going to, kill this bottle or whatever. We will, especially in our culture, we'll smoke. My partner and I are on a THC break right now as we prepare for our next hero dose. And so he was definitely a proponent of this. He would wake up, dab to the face throughout the day, taking constant dabs because he was numbing himself to life.
Wait. Dabs to the face. What is that a reference to?
Oh, so many of us know smoking cannabis, rolling up a J, rolling up a blunt, etc. And so dabs are the concentrated THC form. So when you actually, when you press the buds with certain machines, it actually oozes the resin that has like just the pure THC. Depending on whether you get resin, butter, or rosin, will determine if there are extra chemicals added in there to help with the extraction process. But dabs are, they have dab tools, and you just take a little bit of this, it's a gram of whatever it is, and you just take a little bit. It's just, a dab, and you use a dab rig and inhale versus rolling up and, having the harshness of the smoke on the lungs. So it's just a different consumption method. But yeah, people will drink, they'll smoke, sometimes it's not a substance. Sometimes it's Netflix, right? I have had a long day. I don't want to deal with my problems. I don't want to read this self-help book. I just want to get lost in, somebody else's problems until I go to sleep. And then I might do it tomorrow. And so
that kind of reminds me. I think we're having a discussion. So
yeah, no, we are.
It reminds me of Solange's song "Cranes in the Sky," where I slept it away, I drank it away, I sexed it away. She did a whole bunch of stuff to try to get rid of something. I still don't understand that song, but I like Solange. So, but I see what you're saying here. Is that we self-medicate to try to deal with the challenges that we're running away from by self-medicating.
Exactly. Versus just realizing that the best way to get over it is to go through it. And so that's what the shadow work is in Gene Keys. It's looking at the areas of your life where, like, typically the shadow rings true for whatever it is in your sequence. Like, the shadow will ring true, and really taking an honest, and this is important, non-judgmental, because when we start judging ourselves for our past or, you know, the mistakes or things that we made versus trying to see the wisdom that comes from it, then we're in a whole different situation. But the shadow work of Gene, areas in your life where you have lived in the shadow and starting to see areas where, like, oh, I could have, like, if I would have just did this other thing, that probably would have, like, in my case, it would have been more expansive for me. Or looking at areas where currently you might be living in that shadow and trying to contemplate or trying to sit with yourself and see, like, okay, how could I transform this shadow into the gift? And eventually, right, the city, the whatever that is. The other example that I'll give is, so in the activation sequence, you have the what you're here to do, the brand sphere, and then you have the programming partner, or what you're here to learn in this lifetime. And those two really feed off of each other. And so in my second sphere is the Gene Key 54, which is transforming the shadow of greed into the gift of aspiration. And at its highest frequency at the city is ascension. And so even in doing my own shadow work, you know, we live in a culture where, unfortunately, money equals safety. So even though we as beings may feel like, oh, I have what I need, I have enough, right? I don't need those other things. We live in constant marketing message of, you know, buy this and you'll be happy, get this and you'll do this, blah, 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 blah. And then social media, we are comparing ourselves to other people who do have the things. And it's like, okay, well, maybe I do need more in order, because they seem happy, right? Especially on social media where people are putting on the mask, like they seem happy and they have all these things. So maybe I need more things. And so you start to get in.
Well, I'm just processing what you were saying. I to make sure I understand it perfectly or close to perfectly. The term shadow work, that has like a frou-frou, a woo type sound to it. You know, some people in Christendom and Islam might say that's not of God. That it doesn't sound like it's the spiritual work that people need to be doing with the term shadow work, and simply because, you know, the things in the shadows, we're scared of the shadows and things like that. What is shadow work? Give us an operational definition so we can really process what you shared.
Yeah. So the way that I deem shadow work is just by sitting with yourself and looking at the areas where I use shadow work a lot now, because in Gene Keys, that's literally what it's called. So immaturity is a shadow. So when you sit with yourself and you look at areas of your life where you have been desperate sometimes for that external validation instead of being internally grounded, like, that's work. It's looking at areas where you've lived in those lower frequencies. Maybe that's a better terminology for it, is looking at those areas where you weren't at your highest self, you weren't at your highest vibration. Even, you know, with the shadow of greed or the lower frequency of greed, when we think about the gift that's aspiration, so many of us, we play it safe. We don't aspire for greater things because we're not sure if it's going to result in a monetary exchange. I work a lot with business owners. So many business owners, they hold themselves back from ideas that would really light them up, would really ignite their whole passion, soul, whatever you want to call it. But if it's not going to make them money, then they won't do it. And so they limit their aspirations because they're like, I need the money coming in. And so that's just what I mean, is just contemplating those areas where you've been in those lower frequencies. You've been kind of down here, holding
that
yourself
makes sense.
back.
That makes sense. That's a really great way of describing it. And as you were given this beautiful definition, I saw the term shadow, and I thought to myself, you know, if a light is in front of you, the shadow is behind you. So you're living in the things in your past that are still kind of holding you back, that are tying you down, that are drains on your system, on your power and your empowerment. I also thought to myself, if the shadow is in front of you, you might be in the wrong direction. That I love the way you describe that. So now that I understand shadow work, I can better understand what you're describing now with the gene keys. And
yeah, I appreciate that clarity because, you know, I consider myself more spiritual than religious. And so I do recognize that using terms like shadows and things like that, it might be off-putting for some people. So I appreciate that, you know, that moment to take a beat and be like, oh, hold on, what do you mean by that?
okay. Well, tell us more, and then why don't we wrap this up with you telling us how Diamond Drip became Diamond Drip. That's a beautiful term, a beautiful phrase, a beautiful name, a moniker. So yeah, so finish up with the spiritual work and the shadow work and gene keys, and then tell us about Diamond Drip.
Yeah, so the only thing that I'll say to close out gene keys is just I always say it was easier for me. The way that I'm designed, I'm very like practical solutions. And so I found human design first, and it was very much easy to adapt. It was like, okay, I have emotional authority. That means my sacral tells me, and then I sleep on it. I ride out the wave. And if it's still a yes, then like, yeah, I'm going to do it. If it's a no, then I'm not going to do it. And it was easy to experiment with human design. I found gene keys like 2 months after human design. And like I said, I wasn't feeling very abundant, number one. So to think about superabundance, it was like, okay, so how do I get from external validation to expansion to superabundance? Like, how do I do that? And the answer is just like, contemplate. It's, you know, asking yourself these questions. And that's why, like, yeah, of course, I love saving people time by doing human design readings and having people in different packages where we can do the work together. But you can Google things, you can YouTube things. There are different workbooks that are out there where you can hold yourself accountable to diving into that work. And gene keys, you can too, to a certain extent, but having a guide helps to further that accountability. Because like I said, when things get uncomfortable, we're quick to sometimes put it down. We're quick to avoid it. My aunt, who is 80, I gave her a chakra book. Like, it was like intro to like chakra alignment. And she has been a people pleaser her whole life. And some of the things in the book were asking her to take a look at herself, to take a look at, you know, what brought her joy. And she started to get scared. And she actually like put the book down. Like, it's easy to put something down if you don't have someone holding you accountable to whatever it is. So gene keys is a lot of contemplation. It is a lot of like deep getting into like, where have you lived in these things so that you can transform into the gifts, into those higher frequencies. So I'll just say, I always say, start with human design first. And then once you've kind of been walking the path a little bit and you want to get deeper into these different gifts and strengths and things that are in your chart, then Gene Keys would be a great time to do that work. You had asked, how did I become Diamond Drip? So Diamond is my birth given name, and Drip actually was an homage to things that I loved. So I mentioned earlier that my partner is a dabber, and so we would dab together, honestly. Yep. so as a mental health advocate who hadn't yet discovered my clinical trial experience and all of the things that come from psilocybin, as I discovered, before I discovered the psilocybin piece, I was very much a proponent of cannabis because it helped with pain, it helped with insomnia, it was a natural remedy. And so it was an homage to like the drip of like pressing the bud, having the liquid go ooze out. And then my second business, my current business, was started as a graphic design company. And so even though everything was digital, my favorite medium, my favorite way to make art is actually painting. And so it was kind of like, paint dripping off the brush. So as a business, we know that branding, having an online presence is super important. So I have built my brand around this Coach Diamond Drip. I've coined the hashtag Coach Diamond Drip. I trademarked Diamond Drip Consulting. So everything is around that brand now.
Wait. I love the empowerment message you just said. And it was only 2 seconds. I trademarked the name.
Yep.
A lot of us don't necessarily take that step to create ownership. And true empowerment is embodied in ownership. If you don't own something, we fight on blocks and say, I'm repping my street, and you don't own that property. The landlord can kick you out. They own that street. We walk like, whose streets? Our streets. Nah, you don't own the mortgage on that. You don't have the deed on that. And so, but you have the deed, you have the receipts, you have the documentation that gives you ownership on Diamond Drip. I think that was a power move that more of us should take. And I really salute you for taking that step, and not only taking the step, but just saying it so casually. So savoir faire, I was like, oh snap, she bout it. This is the type of work we need to be doing. Code keepers, I'm telling you, look, if you want to be on top of your game, you got to have a coach. If you want to be on top of your game, you got to have ownership. If you want to be on top of your game, you have to know what you were designed to do. So get drippy. Go to Coach Diamond Drip's website. That's Diamond Drip Consulting LLC. Find that. Take that assessment so you can learn how you were designed. If you're so moved, move forward with getting the coaching from Diamond Drip, or honestly, get the coaching, get the mentorship, get the guidance. Someone taught you how to read. Someone taught you how to tie your shoes. Someone taught you how to do a lot of things that you do. So if you want to get up there, if you want to be empowered, if you really want to get on code, get yourself your own personal code keeper. Get someone who's going to keep you on code. Diamond Drip, hey, last few words. What are the last things you want to share?
Yeah, my favorite thing to say is the limit does not exist, but fear and self-doubt will keep you stuck and make you think that it does. So it's time to challenge those beliefs. It's time to get out of your own way and step into your limitless potential.